The heavy glass doors of Atelier, Beverly Hills' most exclusive salon, swung open with a soft chime. The scent of imported lavender candles and high-end hair products filled the air, mingling with the hushed murmur of elite clientele sipping chilled champagne. Every surface gleamed, gold accents, Italian marble, crystal chandeliers casting soft reflections against the polished floors. Here, appearances were everything. Then he walked in. A man in worn jeans, a black t-shirt slightly frayed at the edges, and scuffed boots that had seen better days. His unkempt beard stretched past his jawline, thick and unruly. His dark hair, long and tangled, hung over his shoulders, as though it hadn't been touched in months. He moved with a quiet confidence, unfazed by the sudden shift in the room's energy. But the moment he stepped across the threshold, the world inside Atelier seemed to freeze. A woman with immaculately styled blonde waves leaned toward her friend, whispering behind a manicured hand. "Who let that in here?" A man dressed in a crisp designer suit, reclining near the champagne bar, arched a skeptical brow. "Lost, maybe," he muttered to his companion, smirking. The murmurs swelled, subtle but unmistakable. Eyes flickered toward the front desk, toward the lone figure now standing before the reception. The receptionist, an elegant woman in her 40s with perfectly sculpted cheekbones, glanced up from her computer. Her practiced smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she recovered, her gaze sweeping over the stranger with barely veiled skepticism. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone clipped, polite but cool. The man met her gaze, his own unreadable, calm. "I'd like a haircut. And a beard trim." The salon fell into a hush so profound that even the distant hum of hairdryers seemed to fade. The receptionist blinked, then straightened, her expression shifting to something more rehearsed, politeness laced with an undertone of doubt. "Our services," she said carefully, "are quite exclusive. Prices start in the 4-digit range." The message was clear. "Are you sure you belong here?" The man didn't flinch. He simply nodded, voice steady. "That won't be a problem." A pause. A flicker of hesitation in her eyes. Then, with a tight smile, she gestured toward the plush waiting area. "Of course. Please have a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." As the man turned, making his way toward the sleek leather chairs, the whispers reignited. "Does he even know where he is? Maybe he's some kind of social experiment. I give him 5 minutes before they throw him out." From across the salon, a tall, slender man in an impeccably tailored black vest leaned against a styling station, watching with an expression of pure distaste. Marcus, Atelier's senior stylist, had spent years curating his clientele, Hollywood elite, business moguls, the kind of people who understood that appearances were power. And this? This man did not belong. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head as he turned to the receptionist. "Are you sure he's in the right place?" he muttered, his voice just loud enough for the surrounding staff to hear. She only shrugged. Marcus let out an exaggerated sigh before striding toward the waiting area. If no one else was going to handle this, he would. The room seemed to hold its breath. Marcus approached with the air of a man about to deal with an unfortunate inconvenience. His polished black shoes clicked softly against the marble floor, the sound crisp, deliberate. Stopping just short of the waiting area, he folded his arms and studied the man slouched in the chair, flipping idly through a magazine as if he belonged there. The audacity. "Sir," Marcus said, voice smooth, calculated. "I assume you're aware that Atelier is not." He paused, allowing his gaze to trail over the man's disheveled hair, the rough stubble, the worn fabric of his clothes, a barbershop. The man barely looked up. If he heard the sneer behind Marcus's carefully chosen words, he gave no indication. He simply met the stylist's gaze, unreadable, and said, "I'd like a cut and a beard trim." Marcus forced a tight-lipped smile. "Of course." His voice held the exaggerated patience of someone indulging a child's foolish request. But you should know, our services are tailored for those with a more refined appreciation of personal grooming. He let the implication linger. People with taste. People with money. Still, the man remained unfazed. That won't be a problem. Marcus exhaled sharply through his nose, then gestured for him to follow. The whispers around them grew quieter, but the weight of judgment thickened. Clients turned ever so slightly in their chairs, feigning disinterest while their eyes tracked the man's every move. The styling station Marcus led him to was pristine, a throne of luxury beneath a chandelier that cast soft golden light against the mirrored wall. The man settled into the chair, his movements unhurried, at ease. Marcus fastened the cape around his shoulders, a little too tight, then ran a comb through the tangled locks with barely concealed distaste. "We're going to need a lot of work here," Marcus muttered under his breath, just loud enough for the other stylists nearby to smirk. "Months of neglect, I see." A stylist at the next station, arranging a row of premium hair serums, chuckled. "Think he's ever used a brush before?" The salon rippled with soft laughter. Keanu, though no one here yet knew his name, simply stared at his own reflection in the mirror, unmoving. Marcus picked up a pair of shears, twirling them between his fingers with a dramatic flair. "Before we get started," he said, lowering his voice as though sharing some grand secret, "we do require payment in full for premium services." He met the man's gaze in the mirror, arching a brow, waiting for hesitation, for discomfort, for an excuse. Instead, the response was effortless. "That won't be a problem." Silence. Marcus blinked, momentarily thrown off. He hadn't expected such an immediate, unaffected reply. The staff exchanged uncertain glances, the game shifting in a way they hadn't anticipated. Still, Marcus wasn't about to lose face. He straightened, forced a smirk, and with a clipped nod, began the process. His hands moved with skilled precision, but his attitude remained deliberately dismissive, rougher than necessary as he cut, making small, backhanded remarks to the other stylists as though his client weren't sitting right there. "Honestly, I'm doing him a favor," Marcus mused, snipping away. "He'll finally look like someone who belongs in civilized company." One of the assistants grinned. "If he can afford it, maybe he should invest in a wardrobe next." Another quiet chuckle passed between them. The man in the chair said nothing. Marcus set down his shears and reached for the trimmer. "Now, let's take care of that beard," he murmured, angling the chair slightly. "Though, at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if birds were nesting in it." More laughter. But then, the heavy glass doors swung open again. A sudden shift in the air. Not the usual arrival of another client, no casual greeting from the front desk. This entrance sent a ripple through the salon, a near-invisible current of change. The laughter died. Heads turned. The manager of Atelier strode in, his steps sharp, commanding, and precise. An older gentleman in a tailored suit, his posture radiated authority, his expression unreadable, until his gaze locked onto the man in the chair. And then, his face changed. He stopped mid-step. Blinked once, twice. As though his mind were trying to process the impossible. His lips parted, the faintest whisper escaping. "No." Marcus frowned, confused by the reaction. The manager never interrupted services. Never involved himself unless something critical was at stake. But then the manager took another step closer, looking almost pale. And in a voice louder, clearer, filled with something just shy of reverence, he said, "Mr. Reeves." The salon turned to stone. Silence crashed over the salon like a tidal wave, drowning out every whisper, every amused murmur that had filled the air moments before. The name, Mr. Reeves, hung in the space between them, a revelation so sudden, so violently unexpected, that for a split second, even the chandeliers seemed to dim. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. He turned stiffly toward the man in the chair, the same man he had spent the last 20 minutes mocking, The same man whose appearance had been the subject of condescending laughter, the same man he had all but dismissed as someone who didn't belong. And now, that man was staring back at him. Calm. Unshaken. Keanu Reeves. The realization hit Marcus with the force of a truck. The room inhaled as one. The receptionist's hand flew to her mouth. The other stylists, the assistants, the customers lounging with their champagne, every single person who had whispered, laughed, or sneered, suddenly found themselves suffocating under the weight of their own shame. The manager was already moving, striding across the floor with urgency, his expression shifting from disbelief to sheer horror at what had just transpired. When he reached the chair, he paused, gathering himself before speaking. "Mr. Reeves," he said again, softer this time, as though still struggling to believe his own words. It is an absolute honor to have you here." Keanu simply nodded. "Thank you." His voice was even, smooth. No anger. No accusation. But his restraint only made the tension sharper, the humiliation deeper. The manager swallowed hard and turned sharply toward Marcus, who was still standing there, frozen. "Marcus," he said, his voice clipped, sharp as a blade. "Tell me you have not been disrespecting this man." Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came out. Because what could he possibly say? That he had disrespected him? That he had humiliated one of the most respected actors in Hollywood? That he had treated Keanu Reeves like a nobody in front of an entire room of people who now looked ready to bury themselves alive out of secondhand shame? The weight of it pressed down on him. His throat felt tight, dry. He stammered. A beat of silence. Then Keanu spoke. "No need for apologies," he said, his tone gentle, but firm. "What's done is done." The words should have felt like a reprieve. But they didn't. They burned. Because they weren't an acceptance of Marcus's actions, they were an acknowledgement of them. An unspoken truth that, yes, everyone in this room had seen him for who he was today. Marcus felt his stomach twist. The salon staff shifted awkwardly, their gazes flickering to one another, searching for some way to undo what had been done. The manager, however, refused to let the moment pass unnoticed. "This is not how we treat people," he said, his voice now carrying through the salon, addressing not just Marcus but everyone. "Not here. Not anywhere." No one dared to speak. Keanu exhaled, then reached up, running a hand through his still uncut hair. "Look," he said, turning his attention back to Marcus. "You're good at your job." Marcus's eyes snapped up, startled. "That's obvious." Keanu gestured toward the mirror. "But skill isn't everything." Marcus didn't move, didn't breathe. Keanu held his gaze for a long moment before finally saying, "Go ahead. Finish the cut." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a request. It was forgiveness. Marcus swallowed hard. His fingers trembled as he reached for his shears, hands suddenly unsure, unsteady. For the first time in his career, cutting hair felt like a privilege, not a job. Marcus's hands hovered for a second before he forced himself to focus. The weight of 1,000 eyes pressed down on him, clients, staff, the manager, all waiting, watching. But the heaviest of all was the man in the chair, calm and patient, offering him a second chance he hadn't earned. He swallowed hard and picked up the shears. The silence in the room was suffocating, thick with unspoken regret, but he moved with precision, his usual arrogance stripped away, leaving only skill and focus. Gone were the condescending remarks, the passive-aggressive tugs of the comb. Now, every movement was careful, measured. Keanu sat unmoving, his expression unreadable in the mirror. He had every right to leave, every right to call for someone else, every right to ruin Marcus's career with a single sentence. Instead, he stayed. He let him finish. With each snip of the scissors, the weight of his mistake sank deeper. Marcus could feel it in the way his fingers shook, in the way his stomach twisted every time he remembered the way he had spoken just minutes ago. He had thought this man was beneath him. Had thought he didn't belong here. And now, the truth was so blindingly obvious it burned. Keanu Reeves could have walked into any salon in the world and been treated like royalty. But he had chosen here, and Marcus had failed the test before he even knew he was taking one. The cut took longer than it should have, not because it was difficult, but because Marcus refused to rush it. For the first time in his life, he wanted to get it right, not just the technique, but the respect. When he finally set down the scissors, he stepped back, hands clasped, waiting. "All done," he said quietly. Keanu studied himself in the mirror, tilting his head slightly. The transformation was striking. Gone was the wild, unkempt man who had walked through the doors of Atelier, replaced by someone sharper, cleaner, but still, unmistakably, himself. Slowly, he nodded. "Good work." Relief washed over Marcus so strongly his knees nearly buckled. Keanu turned in his chair, glancing up at the manager. "I assume I can settle the bill at the front?" The manager stiffened. "Mr. Reeves, please. This service is on the house." Keanu's expression didn't change. "No," he said simply. "I don't take handouts." The manager hesitated, then nodded quickly. "Of course." Keanu stood, smoothing a hand over his beard, adjusting the sleeves of his worn t-shirt as though nothing had happened. But as he turned to leave, he paused, looking across the room. The air was still thick with guilt, with shame. He exhaled softly, then said, "I hope today taught you something." No anger. No lecture. Just that. A simple statement heavy enough to make the walls feel smaller. Then, without another word, he walked toward the door. The sound of his boots against the marble was the only thing anyone could hear. But just as he reached for the handle, an older woman near the styling stations, one of the wealthier clients who had laughed along with the others, spoke, her voice hesitant. "You're right," she said quietly. "We were wrong." Keanu didn't turn. Didn't stop. But he smiled. Just barely. And then he was gone.